The night had grown deep and impenetrable. The lights of the capital city had long faded into the distance when President Ibrahim Traoré departed in an unmarked military vehicle, moving silently toward the northern regions of the country. The mission was shrouded in secrecy so classified that only 3 people in the entire government knew of its existence. For weeks, intelligence reports had been flooding in, each more disturbing than the last. Enemy agents and illegal hunters were allegedly smuggling weapons and gold through the country's dense forests, using ancient trails that wound through territories so remote that government forces had never fully secured them. Some reports went even further, suggesting that these same routes were being used to lay the groundwork for a new rebellion, one that could destabilize everything Ibrahim had fought to build. President Ibrahim Traoré was not a man who made decisions lightly. He had risen to power through a combination of military discipline, political acumen, and an unwavering commitment to his people. But he was also a man of faith, someone who believed that leadership required more than issuing orders from behind a desk. It required witness. It required truth. As the vehicle bounced along the deteriorating roads, Ibrahim's mind turned over a single thought, one that had kept him awake for countless nights. If I don't see the reality with my own eyes, the nation might once again fall prey to deception. He had given explicit orders to his bodyguards. No one else was to be informed. The risk was considerable, perhaps even reckless by conventional standards. But Ibrahim had learned long ago that sometimes the greatest risk was inaction, was trusting others to report what only he could truly understand. He wore the simple uniform of a common soldier. On his shoulder hung a pistol, on his face an expression of stern determination, and in his heart, an unshakable resolve. The 2 men accompanying him were among his most trusted veterans who had been with him through the darkest days of the previous conflicts. Men who would die before betraying him. As they drove deeper into the wilderness, the landscape transformed around them. The scattered villages gave way to endless stretches of forest, the paved roads became dirt tracks, then barely visible paths. Finally, the vehicle could go no further. They had reached the edge of the known world, where only footsteps could carry them forward. The moon hid behind thick clouds, casting the world into an almost complete darkness. All around them, the shadows of trees stretched and swayed in the gentle wind. The only sounds were the occasional chirping of crickets and the distant call of night birds. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of damp earth and wild vegetation. Ibrahim stepped out of the vehicle, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. He adjusted the straps on his pack, checked his weapon one final time, and nodded to his companions. No words were necessary. They had done this kind of thing before, though never quite under these circumstances. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the atmosphere began to shift in ways that were almost imperceptible at first. The wind, which had been gentle and consistent, suddenly stilled. The trees, which had been swaying rhythmically, seemed to stiffen, as if the forest itself were aware of some approaching danger. Even the insects fell silent, creating an unnatural quiet that made every footstep sound like thunder. Ibrahim raised his hand, signaling a halt. His instincts, honed through years of military service, were screaming warnings. Something was wrong. The forest was too quiet, too still. In his experience, such silence meant only one thing. The gunshot shattered the night like a crack of lightning. The sound echoed through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Ibrahim saw his 2 companions fall before he could even process what was happening. They dropped without a sound, their bodies hitting the ground with sickening thuds. He reached for his pistol, spinning to face the threat. But before he could even draw the weapon, a tremendous blow struck the back of his head. Pain exploded through his skull, and then everything went black. When consciousness slowly returned, Ibrahim's first sensation was pain, a deep, throbbing agony that seemed to encompass his entire body. His head felt as though it had been split open, and his arms and shoulders burned with a fierce intensity that made him gasp. As his vision gradually cleared, he realized why. He was bound to a large tree, thick ropes wrapped around his torso, arms and legs, with brutal efficiency. The ropes had cut into his skin, leaving raw wounds that stung with every slight movement. His throat was so parched that swallowing was painful, and his lips were cracked and bleeding. The sun was overhead now, its light filtering through the canopy in scattered beams that danced across the forest floor. By the position of the sun and the quality of the light, Ibrahim estimated it was mid-morning. He had been unconscious for hours, possibly through the entire night. All around him was an eerie silence, broken only by the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. Nearby, he could see the charred remains of a fire, cold ashes scattered across the ground. Whoever had captured Hyman and killed his men had spent the night here and then departed, presumably believing he would either die from exposure or be consumed by wild animals before he could escape. Ibrahim tried to test the ropes, but they were expertly tied. Whoever had done this knew their craft. Every movement only served to tighten the bonds further, driving the coarse fibers deeper into his already damaged skin. His hands had swollen from the restricted blood flow, turning an alarming shade of purple. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm him. He was alone, injured, tied to a tree in one of the most remote regions of the country, with no one knowing his exact location. His 2 trusted companions were dead. The mission had failed catastrophically, and if he died here, his enemies would have free rein to continue their operations, possibly plunging the nation into another civil war. But Ibrahim Traoré was not a man who surrendered easily to despair. He closed his eyes, tilted his head back against the rough bark of the tree, and began to pray. "O Allah," he whispered, his voice hoarse and barely audible, "I have done all of this for my people. I sought to protect them, to uncover the truth that threatens them. Now, in this moment of helplessness, you are my only support. If it is your will, grant me deliverance. If not, then grant me the strength to face whatever comes with dignity and faith." The prayer brought him a measure of peace, a calmness that settled over his racing heart. He had always believed that everything happened according to a divine plan, and if this was to be his end, then he would face it with the same courage he had tried to live his life with. But nature, it seemed, was listening. As the morning light grew stronger, painting the forest in shades of green and gold, Ibrahim became aware of a change in the atmosphere. The birds, which had been silent, began to sing again, but their songs were different, more agitated. He could hear them calling to each other in alarm, and through the trees, he saw them taking flight, abandoning their perches as if fleeing from something. Then he heard Ida rustling in the undergrowth, growing steadily louder. Something large was moving through the forest, pushing through the dense vegetation with a power that spoke of considerable size and strength. Ibrahim's heart began to race again, but this time with a different kind of fear. In this region, there were many dangerous predators. Leopards, hyenas, and even the occasional lion had been reported, but the sound he was hearing suggested something even larger. The rustling grew closer, and Ibrahim strained against his bonds, trying desperately to see what was approaching. His military training had prepared him for many threats, but facing a wild animal while bound and helpless was a scenario for which no amount of training could truly prepare someone. A shadow emerged from between the trees, a large, dark form that moved with a rolling gait. As it came closer, stepping into a patch of sunlight, Ibrahim's breath caught in his throat. It was a bear, a massive brown bear, its fur gleaming in the dappled light, its eyes reflecting an amber glow. The bear was enormous, easily weighing several hundred pounds. Its shoulders were broad and powerful, and its paws, even from a distance, looked capable of crushing bone with a single swipe. This was an apex predator, a creature that knew no natural enemies in these forests. Ibrahim felt his body tense involuntarily. In the wild, bears were unpredictable. A human tied to a tree would be easy prey, unable to fight back or flee. He had heard stories of hunters who had encountered bears, and few of those stories ended well for the humans involved. The bear stopped about 20 feet away, its massive head swaying slightly as it tested the air. Its nose, black and wet, twitched as it processed the various sensations: blood, fear, and perhaps something else. Then, slowly, deliberately, the bear began to approach. Ibrahim found himself holding his breath, every muscle in his body rigid with tension despite the pain from his bonds. The bear moved with surprising quietness for such a large animal, each step measured and purposeful. It circled the tree once, keeping its distance, studying him with what seemed like more than animal curiosity. Then it moved closer, so close that Ibrahim could feel the warmth of its breath on his face. The bear's eyes, deep and dark, met his own. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, man and beast, predator and prey, or perhaps something else entirely. What happened next defied all of Ibrahim's expectations. The bear did not attack. Instead, it lowered its massive head and began to sniff at the ropes binding him to the tree. Its nose moved along the coarse fibers, following them from Ibrahim's chest down to where they were tied at the base of the tree. Then, with a movement that seemed almost deliberate, almost thoughtful, the bear raised one of its huge paws and struck at the rope. The blow was controlled, not the savage swipe of an animal trying to kill, but something more measured. The rope shifted slightly but held firm. The bear tried again, this time gripping the rope in its jaws. Ibrahim could feel the tension change as the animal began to pull, applying force in a way that seemed calculated to loosen rather than simply tear. The rope stretched, the tree creaked, and Ibrahim felt a slight give in the bonds that had been cutting into his flesh. "What are you doing?" Ibrahim whispered, more to himself than to the bear. His mind was racing, trying to process what he was witnessing. This was not normal animal behavior. Bears didn't rescue humans. Bears were driven by instinct, hunger, territory, self-preservation. They didn't single quotes t ... and then he saw it ... as the bear shifted position, exposing its flank. Ibrahim noticed a long scar running along its side. The scar was old, well-healed, but distinctive in its pattern. It formed an irregular line from the bear's shoulder down to its hindquarters, the kind of wound that could only have come from a severe injury, the kind of injury he had once treated. Memory flooded back with stunning clarity. 3 years ago, during a different kind of mission, one focused on conservation rather than security, Ibrahim had been touring the northern forests with wildlife officials. They had been discussing the establishment of protected areas when they heard a terrible sound: an animal in distress, crying out in pain. They had found a young bear, barely more than a cub, caught in an illegal trap. The trap had torn a deep gash in its side, and the animal was losing blood rapidly. The wildlife officials had wanted to put it down, arguing that it was too dangerous to approach, that the bear would die anyway, but Ibrahim had refused. Against the advice of his security team, he had personally helped to free the young bear, had held it down while the veterinarian treated its wounds, had ensured it received proper care. He had visited the bear daily during its recovery at a temporary wildlife facility, bringing food, speaking softly to it, helping it heal. When the bear had finally been released back into the wild, healthy and strong, Ibrahim had felt a profound sense of satisfaction. It had been a small act of kindness in a world that often seemed dominated by violence and cruelty. He had not expected anything in return. It had simply been the right thing to do. Now, looking at the scar on this massive bear, seeing the familiar pattern of that old wound, Ibrahim felt tears welling in his eyes. "It's you," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "You're the one I saved. You came back?" The bear paused in its efforts with the rope and turned its great head to look at Ibrahim. For a moment, their eyes met again, and Ibrahim could have sworn he saw recognition. There's something beyond mere animal instinct, something that transcended the ordinary boundaries between species. "Oh Allah," Ibrahim breathed, overwhelmed by the realization, "you sent him back to me. You sent him to save me, just as I once saved him." With renewed vigor, the bear returned to its task, pulling and tugging at the ropes with increasing determination. And as Ibrahim watched through his tears, he felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the possibility of rescue, but for the reminder that kindness was never wasted, that compassion had a way of echoing through time, in ways we could never predict. The rope was beginning to fray under the bear's persistent efforts. Ibrahim could feel it giving way, strand by strand, could feel the pressure on his chest and arms beginning to ease. Hope, which had seemed so distant just minutes ago, now surged through him with almost painful intensity. But then, cutting through the quiet determination of the scene, came a sound that sent ice through Ibrahim's veins, a long mournful howl that echoed across the forest. It was followed by another, and then another, each one coming from a different direction, but all converging on their location. The bear's head snapped up immediately. Its ears, which had been relaxed, now stood erect and alert. The animal's entire posture changed, becoming tense and defensive. It moved to position itself between Ibrahim and the direction of the howls, and from deep in its chest came a low, rumbling growl. Ibrahim's military training kicked in despite his helpless situation. He knew that sound, had heard it before in different contexts. Wolves, a pack of them, and from the variety of howls, a large pack. They were hunting, communicating with each other, coordinating their approach through the undergrowth. Ibrahim began to see movement shadows slipping between the trees with practiced stealth. One by one, they emerged into view. 6 wolves, each one large and powerfully built, with thick gray fur and eyes that gleamed with predatory intelligence. They moved with the confidence of experienced hunters, spreading out to form a loose circle around the tree where Ibrahim was bound. These were not the desperate, scavenging animals of folklore. These were apex predators in their prime, working together with the kind of sophisticated strategy that made wolf packs so successful. Their leader was obvious, an old male with a scarred muzzle and one ear that had been partially torn away in some long-ago fight. He moved with authority, directing the others with subtle movements of his head and body. The bear stood its ground, positioning itself directly in front of Ibrahim. It rose up on its hind legs, an intimidating display of size and power, and released a roar that seemed to shake the very earth. The sound was deafening, primal, filled with challenge and warning. Birds erupted from nearby trees, and for a moment, even the wolves hesitated. But only for a moment. The pack leader lowered its head and released a growl that was answered by the others. They began to move again, tightening their circle, each wolf maintaining eye contact with the bear, looking for any sign of weakness, any opportunity to strike. Ibrahim pulled desperately at his bonds, ignoring the pain as the rope cut deeper into his already raw flesh. Blood ran down his arms from where his fingernails had torn, but he barely noticed. All his attention was focused on the scene unfolding before him, one animal standing between him and certain death, facing impossible odds with courage born of something deeper than mere instinct. "Oh Allah," Ibrahim prayed aloud, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I am not alone. This is your system, your design. You are my protector." The bear dropped to all fours again and slammed one massive paw into the ground. Dirt and leaves exploded upward, and the nearest wolf jumped back reflexively. But the others kept circling, kept looking for an opening. Then, with a coordinated precision that spoke of countless successful hunts, they attacked. The pack leader feinted right while 2 of his packmates lunged from the left. The bear spun with surprising speed for such a large animal, its paw connecting with one of the wolves in midly. The sound of the impact, bone meeting flesh with tremendous force, was sickening. The wolf yelped and tumbled away, but the others pressed their advantage. One wolf managed to get behind the bear and lunged for its hindquarters. Its teeth found purchase, sinking into the bear's leg. The bear roared in pain and fury, spinning to dislodge the attacker. The wolf held on for a moment longer before the bear's other paw caught it squarely in the ribs, sending it flying. But the wolf's strategy was working. While the bear dealt with the attack from behind, another wolf darted in from the front, snapping at the bear's face. The bear reared up again, using its height advantage, and brought both paws down. One of them caught the attacking wolf, and there was a crack that suggested broken bones. Ibrahim watched in horror and awe. The bear was fighting magnificently, but the odds were terrible. It was bleeding from several wounds, now the bite to its leg, a gash across its shoulder, and several smaller cuts where wolves had managed quick strikes before retreating. The wolves, too, had paid a price too, were clearly injured, one possibly dying, but they still had the advantage of numbers. With desperate strength born of terror and determination, Ibrahim pulled at the frayed rope. He could feel it giving way more with each pull, could feel individual strands snapping. The bear had loosened it enough that escape was now possible if he could just get free in time to help, to do something, anything. The pack leader, seeing his pack's casualties, changed tactics. Instead of continued assault, he pulled back, and the others followed his lead. They formed a wider circle, pacing, watching, waiting. It was a siege strategy. They would wear down the bear through attrition, attacking when it showed fatigue, slowly bleeding it until it could no longer defend. The bear, breathing heavily, blood matting its fur, nonetheless stood firm. Its eyes never left the wolves, tracking each one as they moved. When one would feint toward Ibrahim, the bear would shift to block, making it clear that any path to the bound human went through it first. Time seemed to stretch, each second feeling like an hour. Ibrahim could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, could feel sweat mixing with blood on his torn wrists. The rope was so close to breaking now. Just a few more pulls, just a little more effort, and then one of the wolves, younger and more impulsive than the others, broke formation. It charged directly at the bear from the side, perhaps thinking the larger animal was too wounded to respond effectively. It was a fatal mistake. The bear pivoted with shocking speed, and met the charge head-on. Its jaws closed on the wolf's neck, and there was a terrible crunch. When the bear released its grip, the wolf fell and did not move again. The pack leader howled, a sound full of rage and grief. The remaining wolves tensed, preparing for what Ibrahim recognized as a final all-out assault. They would either kill the bear now or die trying. There would be no more tactical withdrawals, no more patient waiting. Ibrahim gave one final, desperate pull. The rope snapped. His arms were suddenly free, though they hung useless at his sides, numb from hours of restricted circulation. Ibrahim slumped forward, nearly falling, catching himself on his knees. His legs were still bound, but his hands were free. The wolves saw the movement and hesitated. Their attention split between the bear and this new development. In that moment of confusion, the bear released another earth-shaking roar and charged. It didn't attack the wolves directly. Instead, it charged toward Ibrahim, placing itself even more firmly between the man and the pack. The message was clear and unmistakable. You cannot have him. The pack leader, old and wise, seemed to understand that the cost had become too high. He had already lost 2 pack members, and others were injured. The bear, despite its wounds, showed no sign of backing down. And now the human was partially free, potentially adding another threat to the equation. With a final, frustrated snarl, the pack leader turned away. One by one, the others followed, melting back into the forest shadows from which they had come. Their retreat was neither hasty nor panicked. They left with dignity. But they left nonetheless. The silence that followed was profound. For a long moment, neither Ibrahim nor the bear moved. Then, slowly, the bear turned to face him. Its sides were heaving with exhaustion, and blood dripped steadily from multiple wounds. But in its eyes, there was triumph and something else, something that looked remarkably like concern. Ibrahim's fingers fumbled with the ropes around his legs, but they were stiff and unresponsive. "Wait," he croaked, his voice barely functioning. Let me help you first." He managed to reach the military pack that his captors had tossed aside, assuming he would never need it again. Inside, he found the first aid kit he always carried. His hands were shaking from exhaustion, from pain, from the aftermath of adrenaline, but he forced them to steady. The bear watched him warily as he pulled out bandages and antiseptic. "Easy," Ibrahim murmured, using the same soft tone he had used 3 years ago when treating a frightened, wounded cub. "I helped you once before. Let me help you again." Whether the bear understood the words or simply recognized the tone, it slowly sank down onto its haunches. It was clearly exhausted, and the fight had taken a heavy toll. Ibrahim crawled closer, still unable to stand. When he reached the bear's side, he gently touched its flank. Near the worst of the wounds, a deep bite to the shoulder that was bleeding freely. The bear flinched but didn't pull away. "This will hurt," Ibrahim warned, and began to clean the wound. The bear made a low sound, part growl and part whimper, but remained still. As Ibrahim worked, tears ran down his face, mixing with the dirt and blood that covered his skin. "You came back," he whispered, as he wrapped a bandage around the bear's leg, where another wolf had bitten deep. "After all this time, you remembered, or perhaps," he paused, looking up at the sky visible through the canopy. "Perhaps it wasn't your memory at all. Perhaps it was his plan. He finished, binding the worst wounds as best he could with his limited supplies. The bear would survive, he thought. It was strong, and the wounds, while serious, were not mortal. But it needed rest, needed time to heal. When he was done, Ibrahim finally managed to free his own legs. He tried to stand but immediately fell, his muscles refusing to obey after hours of immobility. The bear moved closer, and Ibrahim found himself leaning against its massive, warm body for support. They sat together like that for a long time, man and beast, savior and saved. Though at this point, it was unclear which was which. Ibrahim's hands rested on the bear's fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of its breathing. And as the afternoon sun painted long shadows through the forest, he felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. "Thank you," he said simply, knowing the words were inadequate but needing to say them anyway. "Thank you, my friend. My protector?" The bear made a soft, chuffing sound and gently nuzzled his shoulder. Then, slowly, it rose to its feet. It took a few steps away, then paused and looked back at Ibrahim, as if making sure he would be all right. "Go," Ibrahim said, understanding. "You need to rest, to heal. I can make it from here." The bear regarded him for a moment longer, those dark eyes holding his gaze. Then, with a final soft grunt, it turned and limped into the forest. Within moments, it had disappeared among the trees, as if it had never been there at all. That Ibrahim sat alone in the clearing, looking at the blood-stained ground where the battle had taken place. His body ached, his wounds throbbed, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. But his spirit was soaring. "O Allah," he said, his voice breaking with emotion, "you have shown me a miracle today. You have reminded me that kindness is never wasted, that mercy creates echoes that ripple through time in ways we cannot imagine. You sent help from the most unexpected source, and in doing so, you have renewed my faith." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, President Ibrahim Traoré finally found the strength to stand. His journey back to civilization would be long and painful, but he knew he would make it. He had been given a gift, not just the gift of survival, but the gift of understanding. He began to walk, one painful step at a time, toward home, and with each step, his resolve grew stronger. This experience would change him, would change his leadership, would change how he viewed the world and his place in it. The bear had given him more than his life. It had given him a purpose renewed and clarified. Behind him, somewhere deep in the forest, a bear's call echoed through the trees. Whether it was his savior or just another animal, Ibrahim chose to believe it was a farewell, a promise, a blessing. He raised his hand in salute to the forest and continued walking. It was nearly dawn when Ibrahim finally stumbled into a small village on the outskirts of the forest. The villagers, early risers preparing for their daily work, were shocked to see a man emerge from the trees, bloodied, torn, barely able to stand, but somehow alive. They rushed to help him, bringing water and calling for their healer. Word spread quickly, and within an hour, a military helicopter was landing in the village center. His security team, who had been searching frantically since his disappearance, nearly wept with relief when they saw him. "Sir, we thought," the captain of his guard began, but Ibrahim raised a hand to stop him. "There will be time for explanations," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "First, I need medical attention. And then I have a story to tell." At the hospital in the capital, doctors worked for hours to treat his wounds. The rope burns were severe, requiring skin grafts in some places. He had multiple contusions, signs of a concussion from the blow to his head, dehydration, and exhaustion. But he would recover. More importantly, he was alive when by all rights he should have been dead. As news of his survival spread, the nation held its breath, waiting for an explanation. His cabinet convened an emergency session. Security forces went on high alert, and conspiracy theories began to flourish. Had there been an assassination attempt? A kidnapping? What had really happened in those northern forests? Ibrahim made them wait until he was ready. He needed time to process what had occurred, to understand it fully himself before trying to explain it to others. He spent hours in prayer and meditation, reliving every moment of his ordeal, every detail of his salvation. Finally, 3 days after his return, he called a press conference. The room was packed with journalists, officials, diplomats, and citizens. Cameras from around the world were focused on the podium where President Ibrahim Traoré stood, his arm in a sling, visible bandages on his neck and hands, but his bearing straight and dignified. "My fellow citizens," he began, "I owe you an explanation, and I will give you one, but I ask that you listen with an open heart and an open mind. For what I am about to tell you may challenge your understanding of the world." He proceeded to tell them everything: the secret mission, the ambush, his capture, and his hours bound to the tree awaiting certain death. The room was completely silent as he spoke, every person hanging on his words. Then he reached the crucial part of his story. When all hope seemed lost, he said, his voice growing stronger, deliverance came from an unexpected source. A massive brown bear emerged from the forest. I thought my end had come, but instead of attacking me, this animal worked to free me from my bonds. A murmur ran through the crowd. He could see skepticism on many faces, confusion on others. "I know what you're thinking. Ibrahim continued. "You're thinking that I suffered a head injury, that I was delirious, that what I'm describing is impossible. But I tell you, it was real. And there's more. This was not just any bear. It was a bear I had helped rescue 3 years ago, a young cub that had been caught in an illegal trap. I recognized the scar from that old wound on its flank." He paused, letting this sink in, before continuing with the account of the wolf attack and how the bear had fought to protect him, risking and nearly losing its own life in the process. "This experience," Ibrahim said, his voice thick with emotion, "has taught me something profound. It has reminded me that mercy and compassion are never wasted, that they create ripples in the world that return to us in ways we cannot predict." That bear remembered, or perhaps something higher than memory was at work. "Whatever the explanation, I stand before you as living proof that kindness matters, that the way we treat the natural world and all of God's creatures matters." He looked directly into the cameras. "From this day forward, I commit myself and my administration to a new vision for our nation. We will protect our forests, our wildlife, our natural heritage, with the same dedication we protect our people, because they are inseparable. We are all part of the same creation, all under the same Creator's care." The response to Ibrahim's story was immediate and polarizing. Some dismissed it as the hallucination of an injured man, while others were moved by what they saw as a divine miracle. International news outlets picked up the story, some mocking, others fascinated by this African president who claimed to have been saved by a bear. But in Burkina Faso itself, something profound was happening. The story resonated deeply with a population that had long felt disconnected from their leadership, that had grown cynical about politicians and their promises. Here was their president, not making grand speeches from behind a podium, but sharing a deeply personal experience of vulnerability, fear, and ultimate salvation. Religious leaders across the country embraced the story as an example of divine providence. Imams referenced it in Friday prayers, speaking about how God's mercy manifests in unexpected ways. Christian priests used it as a parable about the importance of kindness to all creatures. Traditional spiritual leaders saw in it a confirmation of the ancient belief that the natural world and the human world are intimately connected. Within weeks, Ibrahim had launched the Ramet Alert initiative, Mercy of the Earth. It was a comprehensive program aimed at environmental conservation, wildlife protection, and sustainable development. But more than that, it was a moral framework for governance, one that emphasized compassion, stewardship, and the interconnectedness of all life. The program had several key components. First, a national wildlife protection force was established, made up of rangers trained to protect endangered species and their habitats. These weren't just enforcement officers. They were educated about ecology, animal behavior, and the importance of biodiversity. Many of them were former soldiers, men and women who found new purpose in protecting life rather than taking it. Second, a new curriculum was introduced in schools across the country. Children learned not just about their nation's history and culture, but about their natural heritage. They studied the ecosystems of their forests, the species that live there, and the importance of conservation. Field trips to national parks became standard, giving urban children the chance to experience the wilderness their president had nearly died in. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Ibrahim instituted what he called mercy councils in every region of the country. These were community organizations that brought together government officials, religious leaders, traditional authorities, and ordinary citizens to discuss environmental issues and their solutions. It was grassroots democracy combined with environmental stewardship, giving people a real voice in how their natural resources were managed. The international community took notice. Environmental organizations praised the initiative and offered support. Conservation groups sent experts to help train the wildlife protection forces. Funding began to flow in from international donors, impressed by this African nation's commitment to protecting its natural heritage. But perhaps the most infamous change was in Ibrahim himself. His near-death experience and miraculous salvation had fundamentally altered his perspective on leadership and power. He became known for a more consultative style, for listening more and speaking less, for humility rather than bravado. In cabinet meetings, he would often reference his time bound to that tree, waiting for death. "When you're helpless," he would say, "when all your power and authority mean nothing, you understand what truly matters. We are all temporary. Our positions, our wealth, our achievements all temporary. What endures is the good we do, the mercy we show, the kindness we extend to all of God's creation." His officials noticed that he kept a photograph on his desk, a picture of a young bear cub being treated for injuries, taken 3 years earlier. Beside it was a piece of frayed rope, the very rope that had bound him to the tree. Visitors would ask about these items, and Ibrahim would tell the story again, never tiring of it, always finding new meaning in it with each retelling. 6 months after the incident, Ibrahim made a pilgrimage back to the forest where everything had happened. A small memorial had been erected at the site, not a grand monument, but a simple stone marker with an inscription that read, "Here, God demonstrated that mercy given returns as mercy received. May all who pass this way remember that kindness is never wasted." Ibrahim stood before the memorial, his hand resting on the cool stone. Around him were members of his cabinet, environmental officials, local villagers, and a contingent of international journalists who had come to document this moment. But he barely noticed them. His attention was focused on the forest itself, on the sounds of life emanating from its depths. "Do you think the bear is still out there, sir?" asked a young ranger who had joined the Wildlife Protection Force because of Ibrahim's story. Ibrahim smiled. "I like to think so. Somewhere in these forests, living its life, perhaps with cubs of its own by now. Whether we see it again doesn't matter. What matters is that we protect this place so that bears, and all creatures, have a home." He turned to address the gathered crowd. "When I was tied to that tree, awaiting death, I had time to think about many things. I thought about my life, my choices, the path that had brought me to that moment. And I realized something. We are all connected in ways far deeper than we usually acknowledge. That bear and our fates became intertwined years ago when I chose to show mercy to a wounded animal. I didn't do it expecting anything in return. I did it because it was right, because that creature deserved compassion." He paused, looking at the faces before him. "That's the lesson I want to leave with my nation, with the world. Every action has consequences that ripple outward in ways we cannot predict. A small act of kindness can save a life and then, years later, that life might save yours. This is not superstition or coincidence. This is the very fabric of how the universe operates, how God's justice manifests in the world." Over the following years, the Ramat Alard initiative bore fruit in ways that exceeded even Ibrahim's hopes. Deforestation rates in Burkina Faso declined dramatically as communities embraced sustainable forestry practices. Poaching of endangered species dropped by over 70%, thanks to both enforcement and education efforts. The national parks became models of conservation, attracting eco-tourists from around the world and generating income for local communities. But the most profound changes were cultural and spiritual. The story of the president and the bear became part of the national consciousness, told and retold in schools, in homes, in houses of worship. Artists painted murals depicting the scene, showing a massive bear standing protectively over a bound man. Musicians composed songs about it. Poets wrote verses celebrating the bond between human and animal, between mercy given and mercy received. In schools, teachers used the story to talk about moral education. "Children," they would say, "President Ibrahim didn't help that bear because he knew it would one day save him. He helped it because helping was right. That's what true compassion means, doing good without expecting reward." And yet, look what happened. The universe has a way of balancing the scales. The story resonated particularly with young people, many of whom joined environmental youth groups inspired by the president's experience. They organized tree planting campaigns, wildlife monitoring projects, and cleanup efforts in forests and rivers. The bear became a national symbol not just of wildlife conservation, but of the principles of reciprocity, compassion, and faith. Religious scholars of all traditions found meaning in the story. Islamic teachers spoke of it as an example of ihsan, excellence in faith demonstrated through kindness to all creatures. They referenced hadiths about the Prophet Muhammad showing mercy to animals, about how such mercy was rewarded by God. Christian leaders connected it to biblical themes of stewardship and the peaceable kingdom where lion and lamb coexist. Traditional spiritual leaders saw it as confirmation of the ancient wisdom that spirits inhabit all living things, and that honoring these spirits brings blessings. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome of Ibrahim's experience was a grassroots movement that emerged among the nation's children. It began when a 10-year-old girl named Amina from a rural village wrote a letter to the president. In it, she described how his story had inspired her to start a kindness club at her school, where students committed to performing one act of kindness each day to people, animals, or the environment. The letter reached Ibrahim's desk, and he was so moved that he invited Amina to the presidential palace. Their meeting was filmed and broadcast nationally. In it, Ibrahim listened intently as the young girl explained her club's activities. "Mr. President," she said with remarkable poise for her age, "you showed kindness to a bear when no one was watching, when you didn't have to. That's what real kindness is. So we're trying to do the same thing. Yesterday, I helped an old woman carry water. My friend Mousa fed a stray dog. Another friend planted a tree. Small things, but if everyone does small things, then together they become something enormous," Ibrahim finished, his eyes misting. He knelt down to her level. "Amina, you understand something that many adults don't. You've grasped the heart of what I learned in that forest. Will you help me spread this message?" And so began the National Kindness Initiative, a youth-led movement with Ibrahim as its patron. Within a year, kindness clubs had been established in over 3,000 schools across Burkina Faso. Each club maintained a kindness journal, where members recorded their daily acts of compassion. These journals became treasured documents, passed from grade to grade, creating a written record of positive change. The impact was measurable. Schools with active kindness clubs reported decreased bullying, improved academic performance, and better relationships between students and teachers. Communities noticed increased volunteerism, cleaner public spaces, and greater care for local animals. The movement even spread beyond Burkina Faso. With similar clubs forming in neighboring countries, Ibrahim made it a point to visit different schools each month. Sitting with students and hearing their stories, he would share his own experience, always emphasizing the same themes: that compassion requires no special resources or abilities, that small acts matter, that the world responds to how we treat it. During one such visit, a shy boy raised his hand and asked, "Mr. President, do you ever wonder why the bear came back? I mean, how did it even know you needed help?" Ibrahim considered the question carefully. "That's a mystery I've thought about many times," he said. "Maybe the bear happened to be in that part of the forest and recognized my scent. Maybe it was pure coincidence. Or maybe," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "maybe there are forces in the universe we don't fully understand. Ways that compassion creates bonds that transcend time and space. I believe that when we act with true kindness, we set things in motion that can return to us in miraculous ways. Whether you call that God's plan, karma, the laws of nature, or something else that's real. I've experienced it." 3 years after his forest ordeal, President Ibrahim Traoré received an invitation to speak at the United Nations General Assembly. His topic, environmental conservation as moral imperative. It was an opportunity to share his experience and philosophy with the world. Standing before representatives of nearly every nation on earth, Ibrahim told his story once more, but this time, he expanded its implications beyond his personal experience. "Distinguished delegates," he said, "I come before you today not as a politician or a diplomat, but as someone who has seen firsthand the consequences of how we treat the natural world. My story of being saved by an animal I once rescued might seem like a fairy tale to some of you. Perhaps it is. But even if you view it as allegory rather than literal truth, the message remains the same. We are part of nature, not separate from it. What we do to the earth and its creatures, we ultimately do to ourselves." He spoke of the Ramet Allard initiative and its outcomes. He shared statistics showing how environmental conservation had actually improved economic conditions in his country, creating jobs in ecotourism, sustainable agriculture, and renewable energy. He presented data on improved public health outcomes associated with cleaner air and water. He demonstrated that protecting nature and human prosperity were not in conflict but were intrinsically linked. But beyond the statistics, he continued, there is something more fundamental at stake. It's about who we are as a species, what kind of world we want to leave for our children. Every religious and philosophical tradition teaches some version of the golden rule: treat others as you wish to be treated. I propose we expand this to include all of creation. Treat the earth and its creatures with respect and compassion, and they will sustain us. Abuse them, and we doom ourselves. The speech received a standing ovation. More importantly, it sparked a global conversation. Environmental leaders called it a turning point in how conservation was framed, not just as a technical or economic issue, but as a moral and spiritual one. Several nations announced new conservation initiatives inspired by Burkina Faso's example. Ibrahim received numerous international awards in the following years: the Goldman Environmental Prize, the Tyler Prize for Environmental Achievement, and eventually, the Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Committee's citation read, "For demonstrating through personal example and national policy that environmental conservation and human welfare are inseparable, and for inspiring a global movement that reconnects humanity with the natural world." At the Nobel ceremony in Oslo, Ibrahim spoke humbly. "I accept this honor not for myself, but on behalf of a bear who taught me more about compassion than any book or teacher ever could, and on behalf of all those human and animal alike who show us daily that kindness is the most powerful force in the universe." Years passed. Ibrahim served his terms as president and eventually stepped down, refusing offers to change the constitution to allow him to remain in power longer. "I've learned that true leadership means knowing when to let others lead," he said at his farewell address. "Just as that bear eventually walked back into the forest, so too must I return to a simpler life." In retirement, he moved to a modest house on the edge of the northern forests not far from where his great ordeal had taken place. He spent his days writing, receiving visitors, and hiking in the woods he had worked so hard to protect. The forests were thriving now, fuller and richer with life than they had been in decades. One morning, about a year into his retirement, Ibrahim was hiking along a familiar trail. He was 73 years old now, his hair completely white, his movements slower but still steady. He walked with a carved wooden staff, a gift from a village elder, and wore simple clothes that would not have identified him as a former head of state. He came to a clearing, the one where the memorial stone stood. He visited it often, finding peace in this place where his life had been forever changed. As always, he stood before the stone for a few moments in silent reflection. Then he heard it, a rustling in the undergrowth. Heavy footfalls approaching. His heart quickened, though not from fear. After all these years, he still hoped, ... and then it emerged. An enormous brown bear, grizzled with age, moving slowly but with unmistakable dignity. On its flank, clearly visible even through thick fur, was the same scar Ibrahim had seen all those years ago. Man and bear stood still, regarding each other across the clearing. Ibrahim felt tears streaming down his face. "Old friend," he whispered. "You're still here?" After all this time, the bear moved closer, each step measured and purposeful. It approached until it was directly in front of Ibrahim, close enough that he could feel the warmth of its breath. Slowly, carefully, Ibrahim reached out and placed his hand on the bear's massive head. They stood like that for a long time, connected by a bond that transcended species, that transcended time. Two survivors, two old souls who had saved each other in different ways, meeting once more in the place where their fates had intertwined. "Thank you," Ibrahim said softly, "for everything, for teaching me what I needed to learn, for showing me that the universe is more mysterious and more merciful than I ever imagined." The bear made a low sound, something between a growl and a rumble, and gently pressed its head against Ibrahim's chest. For a moment, they simply breathed together, two lives that had touched each other profoundly. Then, as if by mutual understanding, they separated. The bear turned and began to walk back toward the forest. Ibrahim watched it go, committing every detail to memory the way it moved. The silver in its fur, the dignified bearing of an old warrior at the edge of the clearing. The bear paused and looked back one final time. Their eyes met, and in that gaze, Ibrahim saw everything: recognition, gratitude, farewell, and something that looked remarkably like love. Then the bear disappeared into the forest, and Ibrahim was alone with his tears and his overwhelming sense of gratitude. Ibrahim lived for another 10 years after that final meeting with the bear. He spent those years writing his memoirs, teaching at the university, and mentoring young leaders. His book, The Bear's Covenant, Lessons in Mercy and Leadership, became an international bestseller and required reading in schools across Africa and beyond. When he finally passed away, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, the entire nation mourned. But it was not a mournful grief, it was a celebration of a life extraordinarily lived, of a man who had transformed not just a nation, but countless individual hearts. His funeral was attended by dignitaries from around the world, but also by ordinary people: farmers, teachers, rangers, children from the kindness clubs. They lined the streets as his casket passed, many holding pictures of bears, many wearing green, the color that had become associated with his environmental movement. He was buried in a simple grave near the forest he loved, not far from the memorial stone. On his headstone were inscribed these words, taken from his Nobel Prize speech: "Kindness is never wasted. It echoes through time in ways we cannot imagine, returning to us when we need it most. Show mercy to all of God's creation, and mercy will find you." In the years that followed, the story of President Ibrahim Traoré and the bear became legend, but a legend grounded in truth. Historians documented it, filmmakers portrayed it, children around the world learned it. But more than just a story, it became a principle, a way of understanding humanity's relationship with the natural world. The Ramat Allard initiative continued to grow, expanding to neighboring countries and eventually becoming a Pan-African movement. The principles Ibrahim had championed: stewardship, compassion, interconnectedness, influenced policy decisions from local villages to international organizations. Scientists studying the psychology of compassion referenced Ibrahim's experience as a case study in how moral actions create unexpected positive feedback loops. Theologians of various faiths used it to discuss divine providence and the nature of miracles. Environmentalists pointed to it as evidence that conservation must be rooted in values, not just science. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from the children, generation after generation of young people who heard the story and were inspired to their own acts of kindness. They planted trees in Ibrahim's name, protected animals, cleaned rivers, and carried forward the message that one life, lived with compassion, can change the world. And in the northern forests of Burkina Faso, bears still roam free. Rangers protecting those forests report occasional sightings of an old bear with a distinctive scar, though whether it could possibly still be alive after so many years, no one can say for certain. Some think it's a descendant carrying the same genetic marking. Others believe it's a new legend layering onto the old one. But on quiet nights, when the moon shines through the forest canopy and the wind whispers through the trees, people say you can still feel the presence of both man and bear, two souls bound by mercy, teaching an eternal lesson to all who will listen, that kindness is the most powerful force in creation, that what we give to the world returns to us, often in ways we cannot predict, that we are all connected, human and animal, strong and weak, present and future, and that in showing mercy to the least of creatures, we honor the creator of all. This is the legacy of Ibrahim Traoré. This is the covenant of the bear, and this truth echoes still. The end.